This is another book review. This is going to be about I guess you'd call it meat sciences. There's a huge amount of material available for preserving meat, for making sausages, for smoking meat, for doing all kinds of things, using meat, grinding it, and everything else. But the instructions, he in the forewords of his books, he addresses it. It says that it's divided in basically into two categories. One of them is the elementary home use category, where they just say, do this. They don't say why, or they don't say what it's for. They don't say what to do to change your practices based on your circumstances. They just say, do this. Cookie cutter. This is your one solution, like it. Well, these books, the other aspect is that you have the industrial version where they've got laboratories involved, and they're doing things on a scale that they don't bother using plain English anymore. So it's some kind of scientist describing a method, and figuring out what has happened based on figuring out the result based on what procedure had been done, and then writing it up in a journal magazine to be read by other scientists. And they go to college so they can use those big words, and they don't care if anybody else can understand them. This book bridges that gap. Actually, all of these books bridge that gap. This is a family all of these books are by the same author. Stanley, Adam, however you pronounce that, and Robert Marianski. Stanley has got his name on all of these books, and as near as I can tell, he's an ancestor or a direct descendant from somebody that grew up in northeastern Europe post-World War II. Western Europe had benefit of Western money to rebuild after all of the destruction that World War II brought to Europe. There were bombs and fires and battlefields going on everywhere, and basically when the land was laid waste, they moved on. There's very few cities that were fought over and left intact. One of them was Paris, but that one didn't survive without damage. But northeastern Europe, even though it was, the war in Europe started in 1939. People weren't rich beforehand, and during the war, they were, that phrase, bombed back to the Stone Age. Well, they were already in the Stone Age, and then they got bombed some more. So even after World War II, they were left to their own devices, and there was hundreds of millions of people that living there. They all needed to eat meat. They didn't. A lot of the places didn't even have electricity strung back to their area until 10 years afterwards. So they had to go back to the old ways of how to preserve quality meats and sausages, how to build and use a smokehouse, how to make fermented sausages, how to make authentic Polish sausages. This is one entire family that's published all of these books under their own name. They've got more books, but they're not subjects that I wanted to learn about, so I didn't order them. He's also, from what I've read, I got this book first, and I've read it completely through, and his the way he explains things in plain terms is well worth the money, because he'll tell you why certain things are done and certain things are not done. There's a subject in here for the question about, here it is, what's better, sodium nitrate or sodium nitrite? And people will go through and they'll give you a qualified answer, but they won't tell you exactly why it's a better answer. And this goes through and tells you exactly what's going on. Nitrates are unused for curing bacon, and they're starting to be phased out by the entire meat industry, because the way that it works, you have to get enough nitrate into the meat for a natural bacteria action to occur, and it lists the actual bacteria that's actually working on the meat that eats nitrates, and then the end result is sodium nitrate. Well, if your end result, you want sodium nitrate, why would you even bother starting with nitrate? So that is a good it's a good example of why these books are valuable. They don't go through and just say do this. They go through and tell you why it's a better solution and what is actually going on. This will tell you. It starts with different types of meat. We all know that some meats are really tough, some meats are really tender. Some meats that are really tender, if you cook them the wrong way, they turn into dry shoe leather, like a beef round, because it has no fat marbling in it. A beef round, if you cook it really fast, you end up with a dried up, tough, chewy piece of meat. The same thing will happen with a loin, because it has no fat marbling. You have to cook it the right way, or you got to add fat to the meat, like wrap it in bacon, in order to make it more potable, more edible. There's many different ways in here. It goes through the meat science on how to tenderize, how to flavorize, how to preserve, why brining is good for probably 75% of all the meat cuts that you get, even the ones you get from the supermarket. It will talk about curing, about making sausages. There's different recipes for making sausages, but mostly it's about general meat preservation, and it's an in-depth explanation, so that if you get into a circumstance that's not exactly covered in the book, you can use the information to fine-tune what you're doing to make it work for you, if that makes sense. You know, there's not everybody lives in a cold climate. Not everybody lives in a hot climate. Not everybody lives in a climate that's got low humidity. Here, where I'm at, humidity gets down to about 40%, sometimes around 55% in the wintertime, and it's really cold. There's other times humidity is in the high 90s. So foods that are going to work, preservation techniques that are going to work in the wintertime aren't going to work in the summertime. You have to get the preservation to a certain point before summer. Otherwise, you're not going to have meat to eat unless you butcher again. You know, it's just and he covers a lot of that too, because Northern Europe has got a lot of the same climate issues that the Upper Midwest has. But he also covers the fact that, you know, not every environment is exactly the same. He started off in northeastern Europe. He worked his way across Europe. So he worked in France and Germany and Italy. He also crossed the English Channel. He worked in England, and then spent a little bit of time in Scandinavia, and then ended up in North America. So he covers you know, Mexico, United States, Canada, England, all of Europe, and all of those different techniques are covered in here. So it's valuable, very valuable. He doesn't cover the Pacific Islands that I've read in here, but you could take the information and adapt it to where you are right now. And these other books are they're very much in depth. The back half of this one will show you how to make a smokehouse, how to set it up, you know, using plain metal boxes, laying up bricks, using a cardboard box, concrete bricks. There's another one for in here that I was just checking out. This one is it's a wooden crate that's just wrapped with plastic. And then you get into prefab concrete tiles and pipes that you can stand up and lay up and turn it into a smoker for your own purposes. It shows you how to lay up the concrete pipe, how to extend the tubing to your fire circle, so you can end up having an outside fire pit with the hardwoods drafting through into your smoke chamber and up and out. Or you can burn it the other way. There with a fire door over here, you can smoke out through a chimney over here. So it goes from very basic materials to more complex materials. He shows you how to bury your fire pit in the ground, and then using underground ducting run the chimney out through your smokehouse. But all of these books are the same style of writing. You pick the subjects, and you can trust the authors, especially if it's got Stanley's name on the front. That if it's got Stanley's name on the front and it is about meat sciences, you can trust these books to be relevant and useful for what you're trying to do. So that's my review of these 4 books anyway.